Hey guys, so I'm going to show you really quickly how you can maybe tone down or change the colors of your yellows and your greens super easy. I know I've had a lot of requests for this and it's actually really simple, so I'll do it. It should be super quick. Let's get into it. Okay, so I've opened up this image into Adobe Camera Raw. Now I don't use Lightroom for processing my images. I'm usually working on a maximum of 3 images at a time to get consistent colors and looks. So I just find Adobe Camera Raw as my preference. Now, look at this. I am editing this in Adobe RGB 1998 as well as 16-bit, and I'll show you how, if you're interested in doing this technique, how you can do it as well. So when you're in Adobe Camera Raw, just click on the little menu down here and it's going to pull up your Camera Raw preferences. So again, you choose your color space right about here, your depth, what you want to work in. I work in a 16-bit as opposed to 8-bit. I find that my images are better quality and a creamier consistency. Always, obviously, resolution is 300, and here's the kicker. You just got to open the object in Photoshop. Okay, click OK. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make adjustments on this image entirely based on the environment. I'm not even looking at the subject. Okay, so in the clarity slider here, you can see that if you pull it really far to the left, you're going to really blur it up a bit, and a lot of people like to maybe cream out their bokeh. I know I do. I don't really like a lot of the bokeh that some of these lenses will produce. This one here is, I actually shot on my Sony A7R4, but I used a adapter and I threw on my 85 1.2 Canon. Now it shows up here if you look as f1.3, but it's actually f1.2. Now the issue that I always had with this lens on my Canon system was that it was never tack sharp like my 85G Master is for the Sony, and I'll show you that again is indeed the case with this one. However, I do love the creaminess that this bokeh on this specific lens will give you, so a lot of times it's a trade-off on extreme sharp or soft. Okay, so for this image I think it'll work, but I'll show you what I do. So I have reduced the clarity bit because I want to soften up that bokeh a bit. Okay, and shadows, I'm going to pull the shadows up. That's really going to help with taking the contrast out of the environment and adding back that softness. The same thing with the blacks. If you pull up the blacks a little bit, you're going to really see a buttery, better consistency in your bokeh. Now you can pull your contrast down a little bit. That'll really soften it up. For these images, I love to do that. Again, I'm not looking at her. Okay, so now that we've done all of the softening up of the environment, we're going to come down into our color mixer menu, and what you're going to see is the green. Now green is made up mostly of yellow, so we're going to pull the green down and you're going to see that that already looks a little bit more flattering and less cartoonish with that bright green. The yellows are pretty, but we can pull the yellow down as well, and it's going to soften things up and make it look a little more ethereal. Let's go into our hue really quick. In the yellows, we're going to pull this to the left until the yellows are maybe a little bit oranger as opposed to yellow. And as far as the greens are concerned, you can play with this slider too. If you pull it to the left, it says that it's adding yellow, but I always find that it tends to make it look a little more pinkish reddish, even though it's adding yellow. But already this looks better. Now as far as this blue is concerned, not a big fan, so I'm going to pull it to the left. I'm going to add in a little bit of cyan to that blue, which is something that I always like to do. Now if you click on luminance, this is an interesting tab and it can really adjust and change your image. So because yes, we have so much yellow in this, if we pull it to the left it looks really strange, but if you pull it up just a little bit, it's going to add to that image. It's going to add to that softness and the brightness in the environment. Try it with the green. Again, same situation. It just depends on where you want to take your image. This is all personal preference, obviously. Okay, so I think that's a pretty good start for where I want to take this. I'm just going to click OK. This is going to open up into Photoshop as a smart object. Okay, so here are the adjustments to this particular image. Now, you can see this little square right here, and when you're looking at it, you can see that that means it's a smart object, and that means that you can reopen it again in Adobe Camera Raw in a non-destructive way so that you can tweak it if you want to. But there's something else that you can do which is really helpful. If you right click on this layer, you can choose New Smart Object via Copy. And it's completely different than just duplicating your layer, because if you just duplicate your layer, you'll have two copies of the bottom one, whereby if you do a New Smart Object via a Copy, it is its individual image file essentially. So this is our smart object. If we double click on it, it's going to take this version back into Adobe Camera Raw. So my first pass, I just looked at the environment. I wasn't concerning myself with our subject. For this one, I'm going to hit these little three dots, and I'm going to reset this to the default, what it was as shot. Okay, so you can see as shot, all that green and everything is back. But this time I'm not looking at the environment at all. This time I'm looking only at her. So I'm going to come into my basic. I'm going to pull up the shadows, which is going to brighten her up a bit, as well as the blacks, just like that, which already looks better. And I'm going to tone down my highlights. Now, her dress is blown out, but if I expose properly for her skin in this step, then the dress is still not going to be perfect. So we'll have to do that again. And that's why working in smart objects is so helpful. So again, we can pull down the contrast a bit to soften up her and her skin and everything else. And in this stage, you can also adjust the skin color if you want by changing the color temperature on your slider up here. We can add a little bit of warmth to her. And I think essentially that's pretty good. Now I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to show you how soft this image is, because this is always what happens with my Canon 1.2. So you can see in here how soft this image is. It doesn't even look like it nailed focus at all, which has always been my experience. And although I love the lens so much, and I missed it when I went to Sony, it's still a trade-off. You're never going to get a super tack sharp image at f1.2. Okay, so you can see in here as well that we have a bit of noise, so let's come down to detail. And the noise reduction slider should get rid of that really quickly. Something like that. But it's also really softened her up even more, right? And it doesn't matter how much sharpening you add to this. If you add too much sharpening, you're just going to get more grain, right? You can reduce the color noise, but the grain is just, you can't do much as far as sharpening this. But what I do typically in my images is I will, through dodging and burning and almost like digital painting, you can sharpen it up. And if it's only for online web use, if you're not planning on printing it, it's fine. It's going to show because, you know, the images online are this big and you can't even tell that they're not very sharp. Okay, so we're just going to take one more look. I think that looks good. Click OK. So now this image is going to be, this layer is going to be completely different than the first one, right? But what we want to do is we want to hold down our Alt or Option key and click Mask. Okay? Actually, before we do this, let's just undo that. We are going to duplicate this layer one more time, New Object as a Smart Object, New Smart Object via Copy. And so now I'm going to double click on this, and this time I'm not looking at her face or her skin at all. I'm just looking at her dress. So let's click on our Basic tab, and we're going to reduce the exposure a bit, and we're going to pull the whites really far down. We're going to pull the highlights down to about here, contrast up a bit, and our clarity up a bit. You can even zoom in, and you can look at the texture. If you add some texture in, you can see the detail coming back really nicely in the dress. So click OK. So now we have three separate layers of this image, and we essentially have three separate images of this one image. Now, here's the deal. So We're going to turn that top one off because we're not going to work on it just yet. The bottom one, we're going to hold our Alt or Option key, click Mask, and then it brings us into the bottom layer. It's hiding this second layer, right? But we want to maintain all of the softness. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we have a soft brush, and our flow is probably about 70-ish. And we're just going to paint the effect that's hiding on this layer back onto our subject. And what that does is it just brings back all of those changes that we did in that last copy onto the image without affecting much of the environment. Because we want to maintain the environment, all those changes that we made to the green, everything looks really good. So you're going to take your time with this masking, obviously, because you don't want halos around your subject. And obviously, if you are interested in doing this with selection masking, it makes it much easier. I actually have a full course on using selection masks and how to save them and how to really adapt your image and make your workflow so much easier in my Teachable School, which I'll link below. So we're just going to mask this effect onto our subject really carefully. Doesn't take too long. We want to really be careful around the edges because that yellow-green will come roaring back, which we definitely don't want. So her skin on her hand, her hair, and that's pretty good. I'm just going to pull it up to 100% now and quickly paint over it everywhere so that I can make sure that I got it all. And remember, folks, if you're interested in seeing what your mask looks like, you can always hit your backslash button up here, and then you can see what part of your mask that you missed or that you put too much in. So for this, I'm just going to gently come over and make sure that I'm not completely exposing that green. I'm going to add a little bit more of the layer in here, so it can be super helpful when you're not completely sure what you have or haven't masked off or on. See, super helpful. Her fingertips, I don't want to get too close because I just don't want that green. If you hit your X key, you can just flip between your white and your black super quick. Okay, I think that I want to get rid of this little bit here and just clean up her skin. Make sure it's all off of her face. Okay. Alrighty. Now I'm going to reduce my flow down to about 15 and just ever so gently blend in her hair because I don't want to bring that green back. So we're going to hit our backslash key again to bring it back to here. We're just going to look at the before and the after, and I'm making sure that I'm clicked on my mask here. I'm going to come into my properties tab and I'm going to feather that transition out a bit so that it's soft. If there was any harsher or harder lines in there, then it would definitely just blend that in. Now, if you don't have your desktop set up the way I do, obviously I have all my tools on the right because I'm right-handed, and in my layers menu down here I have all of the items that I like to use consistently. If you can't find your properties, just go to your window and click on properties and it'll pop up. You can drag it in next to your layers, but that's your mask properties, which I always work on. Okay, let's turn on the top layer. So here's our top layer, and once again, what we're going to do is hold down our Alt or Option key, click Mask. So it brings everything back, but this time we're working on her dress. So somewhere around 50%. And again, you're just going to come in using a really soft brush so that your edges are already very soft, and you're going to start painting the detail back in her dress. And this should really help you if you're shooting weddings or if you're shooting, you know, people wearing white clothing outside. It tends to get really blown out, and I love it. I love just being able to control it and bring back texture and bring all of that fine detail right back. It's fun. Okay, so once again, you can see that I'm really trying to stay away from skin and the background for this, because I don't want all that harsh detail and texture to spill onto my lovely blurry background. So be careful. Now the flower, let's see what's going to happen. Yeah, the flower is probably going to have to be masked off as well. So you see I got a little bit there. I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'm just going to come in really quick and just blend this. I don't care if the detail in the dress down here is not as harsh, because it's pretty foggy with that flower that I was holding over top of my lens. I'm just painting that back, and I'm going to soften this transition up a little bit here. Okay, now what about this flower? What about that flower? You know what we could do is we could just decide to bring this flower into full focus, and then that way it kind of looks like it's supposed to be this way. So again, all personal preference and however you want to approach it, right? You could bring that one back too. And that way it kind of all looks a little bit more consistent. If you're going to bring the stem back, you got to have a steady hand. See? Because that didn't work. No, forget it. Not even going to try. Okay, let's come in really quick and just zoom in on this flower. And then feathering my mask is really going to help with all of this, all of the edges, because you're going to see the edges here, right around the front. You can zoom in clearly. Now, if I was doing this on my own right now without videotaping it, I would definitely just use a selection mask and make this happen way faster. Okay, come into your mask and you're going to feather it out. Let me see if I can zoom in for you, and you can see the transitions and how the feathering really helps that. Okay, so now it's really transitioned and it looks better. So we'll turn that on and off. So this is before. This is even more before, right? Because we have the background, and then this is after. So if you feel like that's too much, you can always just come in and you can pull it back a bit. And I think that's probably a little bit better right about there. Okay, so one last little tip that I will give you, new blank layer. We're looking at maybe blending this in a little bit more. Just a soft brush. I'm going to come in at about 20, and I'm going to sample a lighter version of this color, which is right about here. And I'm just going to so gently paint it over all of this, and that's all. And all that's going to do is soften it up even a little bit more. And if you really wanted to play, you could come in and you could use a mixer brush and really soften everything up more. And mixer brush for beginners is actually available in my Teachable School as well, if you're interested in learning more about digital painting. And that's about it. So yeah, just sample your colors and come in, and you can really soften all the edges around her. I hope that this helped you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this edit and I'll post it at the end of this video. But thanks so much for watching. Okay, so I have finished editing this image, and I'll show you what I did to create all of the effects that I did. I used my own actions. I have a retouch set that you can find on my website. I will link it below, as well as another action set called the chemistry set, and pretty much use my retouch set for every single image that I do, including frequency separation and dodging and burning and all that fun stuff. So, okay, so I wanted to show you just the evolution of what I did. So this was when I left you, and I also did a selection mask, which I told you you can find out how to do that in my Teachable School. I did a selection mask, which enabled me to really clean up around the edges of her and not worry about getting anything on her. So, and then I went into my retouch set and I did my dodging and my burning. Now, dodging and burning is something that is really, really useful when you are shooting natural light and the lighting is flat. If you look at this image, it's very flat. I mean, it's flattering, but it's flat. There's not a lot of contrast. There's not a lot of shadows. So I always like to go in and, for instance, if you take a look at, the darkness around her eyes and, put some shape into her face and, do a little bit of liquefy and fix her dress here and maybe fix this down here. And this is the result. So as you can see with this, I liquefied her hair. I dodged the top to simulate some sunshine coming on, and I darkened, the shadows around her face, which really helped, with the contrast. So then the next step was the final product. So again, just more dodging and burning. I'll zoom in so that you can see the sharpening that I did. So there's more sharpening and there's a lot of highlights on her eyes and her lips and her hair and stuff like that. So the actions that I used, it was part of the chemistry. One of them was Drama Queen. I love Drama Queen, especially for lighter images. It gives it almost a royal look to it with, bluer shadows and yellower highlights. So I really, really like that. So as always, this is my artistic interpretation of the subject. I don't do straight photography very often. Most of the time I do more of a creative take on my portrait work. So, that's just my passion and what I do. So I hope you enjoyed this. Just stay tuned. I'll be increasing tutorials and just little snippets like this that might help you. Any comments, feel free to comment below and I'd be happy to respond. So talk to you later, folks. Bye.